Everything secret becomes clear, and withholding the truth can eventually lead to terrible consequences. That's exactly what happened to my family, where everyone has been hiding something for many years. But most of all, I was disappointed by my wife, who believed that I would just be able to forgive her after she cheated on me for decades. Lying in bed with my beloved wife snuggled next to me, I reflected with a satisfied smile on the events of the past day. I started my job, which I cherished, and returned home to the most wonderful family imaginable. Playing tag in the backyard with my two adorable children, delicious treats, and chatting with my loved ones while watching a baseball game on TV filled me with joy. When it was late at night and the children fell asleep, my wife and I decided to relax a little in our bedroom, wrapped in each other's arms, until my wife drifted into slumber and turned away from me. Gently embracing her with my left arm, I couldn't help but smile inwardly. I may not have been extraordinary, and my daily routine may have seemed mundane to some, but to me, it was everything. How fortunate I was. Little did I know it was to be the last of such days. I received a phone call shortly before noon. Carrie was in tears and almost hysterical, making it difficult for me to understand her clearly. From what I gathered, she mentioned something about our son, Troy, kidney disease, and the hospital. I assured her I would meet her there in 20 minutes. After quickly informing my boss, I rushed out the door. In less than 20 minutes, without receiving any tickets, I arrived at the hospital. There, I found myself face to face with Dr. Michael Fierstos in the emergency room, where my son had been taken less than an hour ago, doubled over in pain. The doctor expressed bewilderment at how Troy, a normal and healthy high school freshman, had suddenly developed stage 3 chronic kidney disease. He mentioned that a specialist was on the way to assess Troy's condition. Despite our efforts to stay positive in front of Troy, it was a struggle. Carrie began researching chronic kidney disease on her phone, while I stayed by Troy's bedside trying to lighten the mood with jokes. Carrie stood nearby, reading and holding back tears, growing paler with each passing moment. Whenever our eyes met, I could sense her worry for our son. The specialist, Dr. Brendan Nicholas, arrived 45 minutes later and confirmed our fears. He informed us that Troy would need a kidney transplant soon if he was to survive until high school graduation, even with dialysis. Troy, though only 14 years old, took the news remarkably well, breaking down in tears immediately. I couldn't blame him. Carrie joined him in tears moments later. Dr. Nicholas explained that although kidney transplants are quite common nowadays, finding a suitable match was still uncertain. He mentioned that a familial match would be optimal and likely the simplest, but the issue was that I was an only child, and Carrie had just one sibling, who had 2 underage children ineligible for donation, much like Troy's 17-year-old sister. With 4 living grandparents, there were only 7 potential donors in the family. Unfortunately, they were all tested and ruled out within the week, leaving our family devastated. Despite our despondency, our doctors remained optimistic, or at least they projected optimism. However, the situation looked grim for Troy. There were many tears shed both at the hospital and in the Novak household in the week following the elimination of the 7 potential donors. I've always loved a line from Monty Python's Flying Circus. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. To adapt it slightly, nobody expects a miracle either. But that's seemingly what happened about a week later, and it came from an unexpected source halfway around the world. Carrie and I reached out to Sergio Santiago, an 18-year-old who was the son of our close friends, Jorge and Robbie Santiago. Though we referred to him as a nephew due to our close relationship with the Santiago family, technically we weren't related in any way, or so I thought until it was revealed that Carrie and he were a match, making him a 3-way transplant match for Troy. As we've mentioned, Mr. Novak, having a family match is ideal, and a half-sibling is nearly as good as a full sibling, Dr. Nicholas exclaimed. But doctor, he's not a half... Oh, damn. Oh, no, I exclaimed, as Dr. Nicholas looked on in shock. For a moment, my mind wasn't functioning at its best, until it caught up. Initially, all I could hear was hope for Troy. Then it shifted to the realization that my marriage was on the brink of ending. Glancing at Carrie, I saw her attempting to fade away before me. "Car! Darling!" "Oh, God, darling," I murmured. She averted her gaze, but her blush betrayed her discomfort. I stood frozen, waiting for her to speak. Seconds ticked by, then minutes. I cleared my throat. "Right now, I can only focus on Troy," she said. "I made the call. I had to. For Troy." "Thank you for considering someone else this time," I replied flatly. Perhaps we had our miracle, but our marriage seemed to have slipped away. She met my gaze directly for the first time in what felt like ages, her eyes narrowing. "Not now, Josh. I don't have time for this nonsense." I heard her words and understood them, for whatever that was worth. "How long until they arrive?" I inquired. "They'll be here next Thursday," she answered softly. "Good. They can stay with us as usual," I responded. The Santiagos had visited us around 6 times over the years. We had transformed our basement into a complete guest suite, complete with a main bedroom, a smaller one, and a full bathroom. It wasn't exactly the luxurious 5-star hotel the Santiagos typically frequented, but then again, they were family. Family. Yeah, sure. Carrie and Robbie shared a dorm at Iowa State University during their final 2 years. By the time I began dating Carrie just before Christmas in our junior year, Robbie and Jorge were already a couple. It took some time for me to connect with Jorge. He hailed from a wealthy Spanish family and had a reputation as a bit of a playboy. However, I soon realized he was genuinely kind-hearted, albeit a bit naive due to his sheltered upbringing before coming to the United States for college. Gradually, we developed a solid friendship, though much of it revolved around the significant women in our lives. Carrie and Robbie were not only best friends but also roommates, leading to campus rumors suggesting a deeper connection between them, which I never witnessed. After we all graduated, Jorge and Robbie tied the knot 6 months later, with Carrie serving as the maid of honor and me attending as a guest. Subsequently, Robbie acted as Carrie's matron of honor at our wedding in Champaign, Illinois, another 6 months down the line, with Jorge also in attendance. Our lives became incredibly hectic all of a sudden. With Troy requiring dialysis daily, it felt like there were endless streams of doctors and nurses constantly present. There were numerous considerations, ranging from the surgery itself to the post-operative care, the array of medications needed, and the psychological impact. It would have been a tremendous burden for an adult. Expecting a 14-year-old to handle it seemed unfathomable to me. Troy was understandably scared, and I empathized with him. He was a sporty, resilient kid, usually quick-witted and unfazed by challenges. But this ordeal was different. Suddenly, he was terribly ill and in agony. It pained me deeply knowing I couldn't alleviate his suffering. I knew Carrie shared my anguish for our son, so for the time being, I allowed the unspoken tension to linger. During the following week, I worked half-days, finding solace in my job amid the turmoil of my son's illness and my wife's infidelity. Despite my efforts to push aside thoughts of Carrie's affair, Troy's sickness weighed heavily on my heart, while her betrayal felt like a blow to my core. Work became the only aspect of my life untouched by pain. Carrie and I had little opportunity for private conversation over the next few days. Whenever we were together at home, our daughter Anjuli, AJ for short, was present, preventing candid discussions. Even in the privacy of our bedroom at night, exhaustion led to sleep rather than meaningful conversation. Under normal circumstances, the arrival of the Santiagos would have sparked joyous celebrations in our home. Despite the customary hugs exchanged, I remained distant, grappling with a mix of anger and nausea. It took several minutes for Robbie to notice me, her demeanor shifting as she approached and offered a tight embrace. "I'm sorry, Josh. Truly," she whispered before letting go. I nodded silently, aware of the stares directed at me from everyone else in the room. Troy and AJ were unaware of their biological connection to Sergio. They both assumed it was merely a remarkable coincidence when Sergio matched with Troy. The 4 adults, including us, decided to keep quiet about this revelation for the time being. However, I discovered that Sergio had been aware of the connection for about the past 4 years. Carrie mentioned that he accepted his parents' explanation of events. It seemed that everyone who knew about it was handling the situation well. Perhaps one day, when I knew, I would also come to terms with it, although I seriously doubted that. Once everyone had settled, Carrie left for the hospital with the Santiagos to visit Troy. AJ and I remained at home. As soon as Carrie's SUV had left the driveway, AJ approached me. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked. "I'm not stupid. Something's definitely going on between you and Mom, and it somehow involves Aunt Robbie and Uncle Jorge as well. If you don't tell me, I'll just ask Sergio. I'm sure he knows, and he'll tell me. He tells me everything." Having exceptionally intelligent children has its pros and cons. One downside is that it's difficult to keep things hidden from them. AJ was indeed very perceptive. I concluded that it was better to inform her, even though I didn't know the whole story. This way, she would hear it directly from me without any potential bias from my wife. I shared with her what I had pieced together, which admittedly wasn't much. Her mother had been unfaithful with Georgia Santiago while I was away on a lengthy deployment, resulting in the birth of a child, Sergio, who was both her and Troy's half-brother. This explained why Sergio was such a suitable match for Troy's transplant. "Wow," she murmured, barely audible. "Hold on. You only found out about this when Troy fell ill, didn't you? That's why you've been giving Mom those looks for the past week or so." I nodded in confirmation, feeling a flush creeping up my cheeks. At that moment, I felt like the biggest fool in the world. Little did I know, there was more to uncover. "So, you didn't know about Mom sharing a bedroom with Aunt Robbie and Uncle Jorge when we stayed with them in Spain all those years? They kept it up until I was about 12. Mom always said it was because she and Aunt Robbie were like sisters, and you were aware of it." My jaw dropped in utter disbelief. I was rendered speechless. It seemed there was no need for me to respond to that revelation. "Oh my God, I'm sorry, Daddy," she exclaimed. "I always found it a bit strange, but I was just a kid. She told me you were aware. I believed her." "Damn," I muttered under my breath. "What do you plan to do?" she asked, still speaking softly. "For now, nothing. We need to focus on getting through Troy's surgery. After that, we'll address it. Extensively, I'm sure," I replied. We would prefer if you didn't tell anyone until we've had a chance to discuss it." "Yeah, sure, Dad," she said. "I've got your back on this, Dad." "Thank you, baby girl," I answered. I must confess to feeling reserved around my wife and the Santiagos. I noticed I was receiving a lot of glances from my wife, Robbie and Jorge, and they appeared to spend a significant amount of time whispering to each other. On Friday night, back at the house, Sergio discreetly pulled me aside. "Can we have a private conversation, Uncle Josh? It's important," he inquired. "How could I refuse you, Sergio? You're the one who's saving my son, and your half-brother," I responded softly as his eyebrows lifted in surprise. Sergio and I strolled around our neighborhood. "Uncle Josh, I understand this situation is awful and uncomfortable. I'm grateful I can support Troy," he expressed. "But I need to ask you a favor. A favor just between us, something I believe I've earned the right to request. I need to ask you not to divorce Aunt Carrie over this, and I need you not to seek physical revenge on my father," Sergio pleaded. I could detect the turmoil in his eyes as I scrutinized his attractive visage. While he predominantly resembled Jorge, now that I was attuned to it, I could discern traces of my wife in him. It occurred to me that he bore a striking resemblance to Troy's brother. How had I overlooked that before? "I can't assure you that I'll remain with my wife beyond Troy's departure for college, but I can vow not to seek physical retribution against your father. That's the extent of my commitment, Sergio, despite all you're doing for me. And I suppose for yourself, too," I stated. "So how are you handling all of this, Sergio? What are your thoughts on Aunt Carrie and being Troy's half-brother?" I inquired. "To be honest, I was initially taken aback," he replied. "But I wouldn't even exist if Dad and Aunt Carrie hadn't agreed to conceive me to help my parents. Mom is my true mother, in my opinion, and Aunt Carrie is still Aunt Carrie, though now I feel a deeper connection to her. And I've always seen Troy as a little brother anyway. I think it's great that he's officially my brother, and I'm happy to assist him. We walked back to the house in silence, his words giving me further contemplation. I realized I had only scratched the surface of the whole situation, and it was more complex than I had realized. The transplant took place the following Tuesday. There were 5 anxious individuals waiting for hours. Both boys emerged from surgery in good condition. The doctors informed us that Troy's new kidney began functioning immediately, a positive sign. That night, 5 exhausted individuals left the hospital. Initially, I didn't think much about it when Robbie offered to accompany me to my favorite Chinese restaurant to pick up the takeout we had ordered 2 days after the transplant. As soon as we pulled out of the driveway, she began to apologize. Over the 40-minute round trip, she disclosed the entire situation. By the time we returned home, I had lost my appetite completely. Having been in the Naval Reserve for 20 years and completing 3 deployments overseas, the first occurring shortly after Carrie and I got married, I was deployed to the Mideast for 18 months. To avoid being alone, Carrie stayed with Robbie and Jorge for the entire duration of my deployment. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. I'm sorry, Josh, she confessed. We were partying one night and ended up in bed together, and that's when the idea came to me, which turned out to be the dumbest idea ever. I never told anyone but Carrie, but I can't conceive, and I desperately wanted children, so I thought. She could get pregnant by Jorge and have the baby, and I could adopt it and raise it, and you would never have to know. And everything went according to plan. She gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. By the time you returned home 6 months later, Carrie had shed most of the baby weight, and we just told you she had gained a little weight from indulging in our rich food, and you were none the wiser. And you wouldn't have known if Troy hadn't fallen ill. Robbie lowered her head and blushed slightly. I anticipated more, but received nothing further. However, recalling what my daughter had mentioned, I understood there was indeed more to the story. I scrutinized her for a moment. I've had a conversation with AJ. I trailed off, leaving the remainder to Robbie. Oh, she murmured softly. She didn't just have a physical relationship with him once. I may not have been fully aware of all the details, but I'm not oblivious, I stated pointedly. No, they were involved numerous times before she had the baby. And even after that, they continued over the years. Their relationship evolved beyond mere friendship, right before my eyes. They became lovers. I never saw it coming. At that point, I had only one option, to accept the circumstances. I had my child, and I cared for Jorge and Carrie, so I opted to be a part of what they had, rather than push them both away. Your other 2 deployments, your annual 2 weeks away, other vacations when you weren't around, and when Carrie felt AJ was old enough to sense something amiss, they started going off together somewhere, leaving the kids with Sergio and me. Don't be angry, Josh. Each of us gained something from this arrangement. I gained a son, Jorge and Carrie had some time together, and your son received a new kidney. I don't see it that way, Robbie, I responded. The kidney situation was unexpected. From my perspective, everyone else seemed to benefit except for me. It feels like I was left out of the arrangement between the 3 of you. I never agreed to my wife becoming pregnant and carrying a child for you. I never consented to her having a 19-year affair. Although now I'm starting to wonder if perhaps I was the one having the affair with Carrie. Maybe I was her second choice. He was her first love, and I was just someone on the side. You might have been okay with just having a portion of your husband's affection, but I can't accept having only a fraction of my wife's love. I'm the type who wants everything or nothing, Robbie. You should have known that about me, and so should my wife. So, where do we go from here, Josh? She inquired. I'm not sure, but I made a promise to Sergio that I'll stay with Carrie at least until Troy is grown and out of the house, and I won't hurt your husband, I replied. How could you and Jorge betray me like this? I thought we were friends, practically family. Family doesn't treat each other this way, Robbie. As we pulled into the driveway, the conversation paused for the moment. Within a week, both boys were out of the hospital and back home. It's incredible what modern medicine can achieve. Barring any unexpected complications, Troy should have a long, normal life, and the same goes for Sergio. The elephant remained unnoticed in the room until the evening before the Santiagos were set to depart for home. I had organized for AJ to hang out with the boys in the family room, watching a zombie series while enjoying pizza and soda. The adults accompanied me to my home office, furnished with a love seat, a chair, and my desk. I brought along a couple of wine bottles and picked up a charcuterie board from a local store. Entering the room, I couldn't ignore the fact that Carrie and Jorge were seated together on the love seat, while Robbie was alone in the chair. After arranging everything on the coffee table, I took my place in the desk chair. As everyone helped themselves to the food, I initiated the conversation by commending Sergio once again for his quick response, reflecting positively on Robbie and Jorge's upbringing. Carrie echoed my sentiments, and I could sense Sergio's parents swelling with pride. However, beyond acknowledging my extreme frustration with both of you, I said, addressing the pair on the love seat, if it weren't for my promise to Sergio, you might both be facing serious consequences right now. I turned to Robbie and said, how could the person who was supposed to love me more than anyone else betray me like this? Cheat on me repeatedly, secretly have another man's baby, and continue to have a relationship with her lover for the next 18 years. Yeah, I know all about that now. You practically did it in front of my kids. All three of them reacted to my use of strong language. Carrie seemed like she wanted to say something but decided against it. I understood. Oh, damn, I muttered. You two have been together since they've been here. How many times? Once? Twice? Every single day? Carrie bowed her head and remained silent. I glanced at Jorge, then back at Robbie. Only twice that I know of, Robbie finally replied. Damn, seriously? I whispered. Not in our bed, right? Carrie kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Damn it. I get it now, Carrie. It took me a while, but I understand. You might love me, maybe, but you're in love with him. He's your number one. I'm just number two, like Robbie is to Jorge. Tell me I'm wrong. There was nothing but silence, as if there were crickets chirping in the room. I emptied my wine glass and poured myself another, offering to refill the glasses of the three others in the room, who all declined silently. I love you, Josh. I never took anything from you. I never left you for him. We only got together when you weren't available, Carrie said, breaking the silence. That's quite a statement, dear. You took trust, fidelity, and commitment from me, I responded. Our vows didn't include a provision for extramarital affairs if one of us was unavailable, which 19 years ago meant I was a lieutenant under fire in the Middle East. While I was losing friends, you were lounging in the south of Spain, or in bed with these two, getting pregnant by him and having his baby. We don't even need to discuss the other occasions you two got together. At least you realized you should be discreet in front of our kids and started seeing him elsewhere. Except for this week, it seems. The others in the room remained silent, focusing on something on the floor. It's noteworthy that you had an extra son who helped Troy, I added sarcastically. I'm sure the last thing in the world you didn't want was for this to come out. Finally, the selfless act of the most selfish woman. Robbie's sobs filled the room as Jorge wore a guilty expression. Carrie's demeanor fluctuated between guilt, fear, and a touch of anger when I accused her of selfishness. So what's our next move, Josh? I don't want a divorce, Carrie began. Because I made a promise to your eldest son, and I don't break promises or vows. You have 4 years before I consider divorce, coinciding with Troy's departure for college. However, we won't discuss this in front of him, I explained. But you'll be the one to inform him about Sergio being his half-brother, and it needs to happen soon. I'll be present to ensure you convey it as the story of a woman's infidelity rather than a romantic tale. I'm certain he'll actually be quite pleased to have Sergio as a brother, given their existing bond. AJ was rather happy about it too, once she got over her anger about your mistreatment of me, I added. Does she know everything? Carrie asked, her voice strained. What exactly did you tell her? Now I'm beginning to feel irritated with her. I chuckled bitterly. I never disclosed anything to her. She's quite astute, and over time, she's managed to piece things together, although there are gaps in her understanding that you should probably address. She didn't explicitly know anything, but she had a sense, you know what I mean? However, because she wasn't entirely certain of the situation and due to the lies you fed her, she never approached me and didn't give up on you. She only shared what she knew and suspected when I directly questioned her. She felt terribly guilty for not confiding in me. On the contrary, our son remains oblivious. The blissful ignorance of youth and the trust he places in his parents. And as you're aware, Sergio has been aware for quite some time that you and my wife have been betraying me. I've noticed a peculiar look in his eyes on numerous occasions over the years and wondered about it. Now I understand it was a look of pity. It's quite something when a teenager regards you with pity because he knows that his father and your wife are betraying your marriage. Everyone gained something from this arrangement except for me. I was deceived in the worst possible manner. That's not true, Josh, she sobbed. I have deep feelings for you. I've fulfilled my roles as a devoted wife and mother. If it weren't for this kidney issue arising, we would still be happily oblivious. Can't we at least return to that happiness? I've never withheld intimacy from you. So you're suggesting I should be content being your second choice, just because I was unaware of the situation? I should have always been your top priority without any competition. But tell me, have I ever held that position? I inquired. She blushed and stumbled over her words. At the start, in the early days of our marriage, before I got involved with Robbie and Jorge, she confessed. So you're admitting there was a time when our intimacy wasn't clouded by thoughts of Jorge or offered out of pity. How could you have given me 2 children if your heart belonged to someone else? I believed you deserved to experience parenthood. I do care for you, don't forget, she insisted. Of course. How could I overlook that? I mused. At least from your actions, I can infer that you cherish our children as much as you do your child with him. She gave me a pained expression, then glanced at Robbie and Jorge. If she was seeking verbal support, she found none. We should handle this privately, without involving Robbie and Jorge in our issues, Carrie remarked disdainfully. Are you kidding me? Robbie and Jorge are the ones who caused the problem, I shouted. All 3 of them paled at my outburst. They all appeared somewhat tense. All right, you all know I made a commitment to Sergio, and I intend to honor it. But I need a commitment from you, Carrie. I need you to stay faithful to me at least until Troy goes off to college. That means no more trips to Spain without me, and no more visits to Santiago while I'm on my 2 weeks of reserve duty. Faithful means faithful. You break that promise, I break mine to Sergio, and file for divorce immediately. Understand? Robbie grinned while Carrie and Jorge sat stunned and speechless. I was glad Robbie seemed to understand, or perhaps the promise would benefit her too. The couple exchanged intense glances for about a minute before Carrie quietly agreed, also giving a small nod. That's settled. Would anyone like more wine? I asked. After the Santiagos returned to Spain, I relocated to the master bedroom suite in the basement guest room. Carrie and I had shared a bed while they were staying with us, but we hadn't been intimate since Troy fell ill. This arrangement suited me fine, especially after discovering my wife's involvement with Jorge. Don't act so naive, Josh. How many times have we been intimate over the years while I was seeing Jorge behind your back? Carrie retorted. That's the issue, Carrie, I replied with frustration. I didn't know. Now that I'm aware of your infidelity, my feelings have changed. Carrie's expression soured. Men and your fragile egos. I'll be upstairs when you regain some courage, she scoffed. I sensed she underestimated the gravity of the situation. Thanks to modern medicine, Troy recovered swiftly after surgery, returning to his old self within 6 months. Though he would need lifelong medication and couldn't play certain sports, he was otherwise back to normal. It was time for him to learn the truth about his relationship with Sergio. Carrie and I had been debating this issue for several days. She preferred to let things continue as they were, hoping that Troy would eventually sort things out on his own. Yes, that's what she actually said to me. Nice try, babe. But you owe him a complete explanation, just like I advised you a few months ago. And let's have a family meeting so AJ can hear everything directly from her mother, I remarked. She let out a loud sigh but eventually agreed. Troy had recently turned 15, and I'll admit, I didn't always grasp what was going on in his mind. It made me chuckle because I remembered being 15 and not always understanding my father's perspective either. I knew this conversation might not be easy. I hoped Carrie understood that too. Observing from my comfortable la-z-boy, it appeared that Troy took the news of being Sergio's half-brother quite calmly, as I had anticipated, given his strong bond with Sergio. However, the how aspect proved to be more challenging. Wait, did you sleep with Uncle Jorge? Are you saying that you had a close bed relationship with him, as representatives of the younger generation would say? But you were married to Dad at the time, right? This, in fact, makes you what young people would call a promiscuous woman, he exclaimed. Carrie began to retort at our son, but I intervened, gripping her arm firmly, prompting her to abruptly fall silent. She sat there, visibly embarrassed. A heavy silence enveloped the room for a few moments. Yes, I suppose promiscuous would be the accurate term, I admitted. But that's a matter for me to address, not you. I only learned about this when you fell ill. Your mother reached out to the Santiagos and asked Sergio to undergo testing, hoping for a kidney match. She essentially sacrificed herself in an attempt to save you, so the least you can do is show some gratitude and restraint. Troy hung his head as I scolded him. He was understandably bewildered and hurt. If anyone has a right to be upset, it's me. And believe me, I am. However, this is a matter for your mother and me to resolve. We'll find a way through this. I'm not abandoning you guys. That's why I've moved into the basement, I assured them. I noticed AJ's desire to speak up at that moment. I subtly shook my head, prompting her to settle back into the sofa where she sat. Glancing briefly at Carrie, who sat beside her looking as though the weight of the world was upon her, I could tell she was on the verge of collapse. A few months later, AJ departed for Central Michigan University. Troy jokingly asked if he could accompany her, but the seriousness in his expression was unmistakable. Carrie and I managed to maintain a semblance of civility in the household for the sake of our son. We fulfilled the typical parental duties, attending his school events together. Though we appeared affectionate during these times, the strain of our charade was evident on my wife. I remained indifferent, focused on living my life and cherishing my role as a father. Living separately under the same roof also strained my wife. There was no physical contact, no tender words, no playful banter, and certainly no intimacy. The lack of physical intimacy was an ordeal for both of us, but my desire, tainted by her infidelity to Jorge over the past 20 years, suppressed any thoughts of it. Instead, when I had such thoughts, anger replaced desire. However, it's fair to say that my right wrist has gotten stronger. Josh, can't we at least try to reconnect physically? Our bed life has always been full, and I have never denied you anything. Can't we go back to that? I understand that you have needs, Carrie pleaded one evening, about 3 months later when Troy was out with friends. I appreciated her appearance from head to toe. She remained an attractive woman with a well-built physique. This meeting was purely physical as my feeling of love for her faded. Although there were still remnants of affection, they gradually faded away. I intended to satisfy my desires without caring about her pleasure. I suppose so, but you'll have to go to my room. Knowing what I know now, you have desecrated our marital bed countless times over the years. And I'm just not going to get intimate with you there again, I grumbled. Okay, I understand. I'll be there in a few minutes. I just need to clean up a little bit, she replied. To put herself in order, Carrie put on some makeup and put on perfume, quickly styled her hair. After finishing, I just lay down on the bed and immersed myself in my thoughts. There was a time when I would have cherished this moment when Carrie was in my arms, but those days were just a sad memory. When Carrie sniffed next to me, I realized that she had probably read my mind. Despite the temptation to comfort her, I resisted. A few minutes later, she got up and quietly went upstairs. There were no arguments, no bed conversations, just silence. Going upstairs to watch TV in the common room, I heard the sound of a shower running in the main bathroom. I sat there in my gym shorts and t-shirt as Troy walked in. It was clear something was bothering him. "Dad, it's been months since you've taken Mom out anywhere, like to a restaurant or a club. Are you ever going to forgive her and try to make things right?" he asked. It was a moment of truth. I took a moment to gather my thoughts before responding. Troy waited patiently for my reply. "Troy, I don't think I can forgive her enough to go back to how things were, or how I thought they were. It was all a facade, a lie. Your mother is in love with Uncle Jorge. I'm just her backup plan. Now that I know that, how can I go back? Football teams have backup quarterbacks. Marriages don't have backup husbands," I confessed. "I'm sorry, son, but what we have now might be the best we can do." Troy seemed pained, but I believe he understood. He headed silently to his bedroom. Carrie caught on too. Every so often she'd request some personal time, which became our code for intimacy. I assumed the rest of the time she was satisfying herself much like I was. I couldn't tell if Carrie grasped the significance of Troy's graduation as deeply as I did. Once upon a time I might have cared, but I had long stopped concerning myself with her actions and interests. My love for her had faded away. I still felt a sense of care for her. We had a shared history and 2 wonderful children. But her ongoing deceit had eroded my emotions to mere apathy. I used to believe that hatred was love's opposite, but I learned firsthand that indifference holds that title. Who would have thought? When I went off to college, I packed enough clothing for 10 days, 14 pairs of underwear, and a stereo. Meanwhile, Troy, headed to the University of Oregon, packed for 14 days with an iPad, a laptop, a cell phone, earbuds, and 2 boxes of miscellaneous items. Clearly, times had changed. During the 2-day drive, Troy was incredibly enthusiastic and talked incessantly, practically monopolizing the conversation for 16 hours straight. Carrie and I barely got a word in. It seemed like Troy didn't even realize he was dominating the conversation. Once we dropped Troy off in Eugene, the ride back home was remarkably quiet. I drove for about 12 of the 16 hours, while Carrie handled navigation and controlled most of the music. If I never hear another Michael Bolton ballad again in my life, it'll be too soon. I could sense Carrie's deep sadness now that both children had essentially left home. As I mentioned before, Carrie was an exceptional mother, and her affection for the kids far outweighed her feelings for me. While I might not have held the top spot in her heart, AJ and Troy were undeniably her favorites. Her despondency made it clear she wasn't considering the bigger picture. I anticipated feeling a sense of relief when Carrie was served with the papers as soon as we arrived home, but instead I felt insignificant. She handled the envelope as though it were toxic, broke down in tears, and fled into the house. Reflecting on my intentions for after the trip, I realized they were driven solely by a desire for revenge, which now seems petty in hindsight. It became evident that I needed to seek assistance. From the moment I discovered her infidelity, I knew our marriage was over. I was honoring my commitment to Sergio. I had promised to stay with Carrie until Troy left for college, and I even granted her 2 additional days. I was downstairs in my room when I heard her knock on the door. Since it was unlocked, I invited her in. "Do you despise me that much now, Josh?" she murmured. "Have I ruined everything?" "Yes, you've destroyed everything, but I don't harbor hatred towards you, Carrie. I simply no longer care about you," I replied. "But we had something good for many years before you found out," she insisted. "Did we? For me, it was all a facade after you began staying with Robbie and Jorge. You no longer loved me exclusively, as you had promised. You no longer reserved your affections solely for me, as you had promised. Instead, you had a child with another man. Why couldn't you have been truthful with me once you fell for Jorge? Why didn't you just divorce me? You stayed with me and gave me 2 wonderful children, but you deceived me for 18 years. You stole 18 years, during which I could have been searching for a woman to share my life with, instead of being the second choice of a self-serving woman. Return to Jorge, Carrie. Can't you perceive it? I'm granting you freedom. But I did love you, Josh. Can't you grasp that? I couldn't have endured 20 years with you if I didn't love you. Yes, I'm not in love with you like I am with Jorge. But I genuinely do love you, she sobbed. Your concept of love differs greatly from mine, Carrie. If you truly loved me, you would have treated me right and not kept me as your fallback option. I should have been your priority. I deserved to be the one you were passionately in love with, desired. By deceiving me, you never allowed me the choice to remain as your second choice, or perhaps find a woman who wanted me to be her first choice. I gave you 2 wonderful kids. We had a good life, or so I thought. Gone in an instant. You got what you wanted, apparently. Jorge got what he wanted, apparently. Robbie got what she wanted. And I got what? I got nothing. So what was your plan for after the kids left home, assuming I never discovered your affair with Jorge? Her mouth opened, but for a moment, no words emerged. I suppose I always thought I'd go back to Spain to be with Jorge and Robbie. I'm sorry, Josh, I guess I never really considered you in my long-term plans, she said softly. I understand, I replied just as softly. I won't contest anything in the divorce, she practically whispered. I was taken aback by the fact that both of my children didn't support my decision to divorce their mother. Initially, they were upset about her infidelity, but it seems she managed to convince them that her love for me was genuine. As for her relationship with Jorge, it had been going on for so long that they justified it in their minds. They also rationalized that I would be content being their mother's second choice. Aunt Robbie seems fine with it. Why can't you be like her? AJ questioned. Aunt Robbie was involved in arranging the whole thing with Uncle Jorge and your mother. I was excluded because your mother knew I wouldn't agree. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, I explained. Let me ask you something, AJ. Would you tolerate your husband having another lover who he cares about more than you? No way. I'd be furious if he even suggested it. But this has been going on for over 20 years now, she replied firmly. So I should just accept it because it's been happening for so long? Like Aunt Robbie does? Like you would if it happened to you? She winced and avoided eye contact, signaling an end to the conversation. My suspicion that Carrie would move to Spain after the divorce was confirmed by my children. While I missed companionship, I didn't miss the life I had, or rather, the life I never truly had. Recognizing my lack of trust in women, I sought help from a counselor. However, I wasn't actively seeking another relationship. I went on a few sporadic dates and occasionally engaged in intimacy, though infrequently, but it wasn't a priority for me anymore. I was surprised to notice a significant number of single women in the 40 to 50 age bracket. It's something I hadn't fully grasped when I was happily married. Moreover, I hadn't realized how the dynamic between men and women had shifted over the past couple of decades. Back when I was last actively dating, men typically took the lead. However, nowadays it's more of a balanced effort, with both parties participating equally. It took me a bit of time to adjust to this change. I must admit it's quite flattering when a woman takes the initiative to start things off. Seeing Robbie at my doorstep about 2 years post-divorce was quite unexpected. It took me a moment to recognize her, although she looked almost identical to the last time I saw her. Robbie Santiago was still as beautiful as ever. Please, come in, Robbie. What brings you here? I asked, still somewhat stunned. Can't I visit an old friend? Assuming, of course, we're still friends, she replied hesitantly. She accepted the cup of coffee I offered, and we settled into my family room. She seemed uneasy in her seat, clearing her throat. You never answered my question, Josh. Are we still friends? She inquired. I grimaced as I pondered. We used to be friends, or so I thought, but then I discovered that wasn't your perspective. I began before she cut in. No, that's not accurate, she interjected. I always saw you as a friend. If that's true, then how could you treat me the way you did? I queried. I was selfish and incredibly foolish, Robbie admitted. I didn't fully consider the repercussions of my actions because I trusted Jorge and Carrie. Carrie was like family to me. I never saw it coming. I tolerated it because I gained Sergio out of the arrangement, and it was only sporadic involvement over the years. I relished it when you prevented her from seeing him for those few years, but then you divorced her and reintroduced her into his life and mine. I suppose after all this time, I'm tired of playing second fiddle to him. I understand your perspective now. I was so blind. Feels awful, doesn't it? I remarked smugly. She didn't reply but lowered her gaze. Finally, some remorse shown. I suppose we can rebuild a sort of friendship. Friends united by shared experiences, I concluded. We conversed late into the night, transitioning from coffee to a bottle of Pinot Grigio, which we polished off. When she prepared to depart, I surprised both her and myself by offering her my guest room, an offer she accepted. Admittedly, it was enjoyable to rekindle a fragment of my past life. I believe we both savored the comfort of familiarity. During her second weekend at my place, we dined out at a restaurant and then indulged in drinks and dessert at an upscale bar. It felt like two old friends hanging out, not a formal date, yet somehow hormones intervened. She wore a snug, dark blue dress. I hadn't anticipated any romantic developments. I blushed, and she sensed it immediately. Without a word, she reached across the table and clasped my hand, and we remained hand in hand for the rest of the evening. As we neared my home, Robbie altered the dynamic. "This doesn't have to signify anything, Josh," she murmured. "You're an attractive single man, and I'm in an open marriage. We're both consenting adults." I responded with a bright smile, taking her hand and tenderly kissing it. Upon returning to my place, clothes began to come off almost as soon as we stepped through the door, reminiscent of scenes from romantic comedies. As we headed towards my bedroom, I quickly discovered that Robbie was an exceptional kisser. I won't deny that it wasn't the most outstanding bed experience I've ever had, although it was the most enjoyable encounter since I found out about Carrie's infidelity a few years ago. We indulged in it again that night and again in the morning. We took a shower together before heading to IHOP for a delicious breakfast. We spent most of the day on the couch in the living room, hugging, kissing, and watching TV. For the rest of her stay, which lasted another 3 weeks, she no longer slept in the guest room. "I need to return to Spain to finalize my divorce from Jorge and then think about my next steps," Robbie explained. "We both know we're not good for each other for long, but you're a great guy, Josh. I sincerely regret my role in the destruction of your marriage." "You didn't force her to take such actions, and your remorse means a lot, more than Carrie has ever shown," I replied. "I hope you find someone who really appreciates everything you have to offer, which is quite a lot," Robbie said. Carrie had lived with Jorge for 5 years, and my children had both moved to the south of Spain to be closer to their mother. I missed them, but not their attitudes. I was tired of apologizing for divorcing their mother due to her infidelity. I couldn't believe it when Troy called one Sunday at 6 a.m. Seriously, who calls someone at 6 a.m. on a Sunday? Without checking the caller ID, I grabbed the phone and shouted, "What? This better be a damn emergency or someone's dying." "Dad? Dad, it's me, Troy. Why are you so angry?" he asked. "It's 6 in the morning on a Sunday, Troy. Did you forget about the time difference?" I inquired. Yeah, I guess I did, Dad," he replied softly. "I'll call back later." "No, Troy, don't hang up. What do you need?" I asked. I'm not sure how to say this, Dad, but here it is. Did you know that AJ is involved with Uncle Jorge?" he announced rather than asked. At this juncture, I had managed to get about 3 hours of sleep following a very late night spent with a girl. My son, however, that's a separate tale altogether. By the time he concluded his speech, I was wide awake. What? What on earth did you just say?" I exclaimed into the phone. "You heard me, Dad. I said AJ is sharing a bed with Uncle Jorge," he reiterated. "How do you know that?" I inquired, still speaking loudly. "We were all at Uncle Jorge's, AJ, Sergio, and I." As it grew late, all the kids retired to their rooms, leaving only Uncle Jorge and Mom asleep. In the dead of night, I was roused by noises from their room. and I realized it wasn't Mom. I got up, approached AJ's door, and listened for a while, fully prepared to confront Sergio. Good Lord, he's her stepbrother. But then it became even more unsettling. It wasn't Sergio, he recounted. Are you certain? I choked out. Yes, he murmured. Well, she's 27, Dad. I reckon she can decide for herself who she shares a bed with. Still, it's rather unsettling, you catch my drift? He remarked. And your mother doesn't seem bothered by this? I questioned. He paused. I'm not certain she's aware, he admitted. 2 days later, I found myself standing on Jorge's doorstep, waiting for the pretentious doorbell to be answered. The lady of the house opened the door with a gasp. Josh, what brings you here? Carrie asked, her expression one of utter surprise. I was just passing through and wanted to see my kids. Any issues with that? I replied gruffly. She stepped aside to let me in. Why didn't you give us a heads up? We would have welcomed you to stay, she said. I shot her a glare as all 3 children and Georgie entered the parlor. When the kids saw it was me, they rushed over for hugs, while Jorge stayed back. The room fell silent as I approached Jorge with determination in my eyes. He raised his hands in surrender, but it made no difference. I'm not the most skilled fighter, but I can stand up for myself. This time, anger spurred me on. I delivered my most powerful right punch, breaking through his defense and landed right on his nose. He staggered back, and I struck 2 more hard blows. When he fell to his knees, I thought for a moment about striking below the belt, but dismissed it as too banal. Instead, I kicked hard, not quite hitting the target, but judging by his scream, I did everything right. Stepping back, breathing heavily, I looked around at the stunned audience. Uncle Josh, you promised you wouldn't hurt Dad because of what happened to Aunt Carrie. Sergio screamed, but wisely stayed where he was. I exhaled flames from my nostrils, observing Jorge writhing in agony while Carrie rushed to his aid. I didn't betray my promise to you, I retorted. He received a beating for sleeping with AJ, your stepsister. Did you know he was involved with your adult daughter? I directed my query towards my ex-wife. Her expression shifted from fear to shock as she glanced between me and Jorge. What does he have to say? She inquired of Jorge. Jorge curled up and whimpered. I'm old enough to choose who I sleep with, AJ interjected. I don't need anyone's permission. Yes, you're old enough to make your own mistakes, like sharing a man with your mother, even if it's the same man who tore apart your parents' marriage. But you, like your mother and the fool on the floor, are also old enough to comprehend that every action has consequences, and his recent action afforded me the opportunity to punish him for not being able to punish him for being close to your mother because I promised Sergio. I suppose I owe you a debt of gratitude for allowing me to do what I should have done long ago. However, your choice of partners is somewhat disconcerting, considering everything that has transpired. She blushed and glanced first at me, then at her mother. I'm sorry, Mom, she uttered. Carrie stared intensely at AJ, and I sensed what was about to happen. She redirected her gaze towards Georgie and delivered a forceful kick, connecting squarely with his face. He let out a groan before losing consciousness. Great aim, Mom, Troy exclaimed. I'm sorry, Uncle Josh. I had no idea about Dad and AJ. That's just not right. Sergio apologized. You're right, Sergio, but it's not your fault, and you don't need to apologize, I reassured him. Kids, it's been good to see you all, even though AJ and I need to have a serious conversation someday. Carrie, it's not so pleasant to see you, but I have some sightseeing to do for a few days before heading home, so if you'll excuse me. Oh, and by the way, you have my number in case that jerk wants to press charges against me. Just give me a call and I'll turn myself in. That won't be necessary, Uncle Josh. I promise you that. Dad and I also have some things to discuss, Sergio affirmed. Woohoo! Upon landing from my inaugural parachute jump, I joined the chorus of ecstatic shouts. The experience was utterly mind-blowing. My feet made contact with the ground first, and with my legs stretched out ahead, I eased into a seated position. letting out a scream of exhilaration. Swiftly, I scrambled to my knees and then to my feet, hastening to retrieve my parachute. My heart raced uncontrollably, too absorbed in the moment to even glance at my Fitbit, though I was certain the readings would be off the charts. It felt as though my chest might burst from the intensity of my pounding heart, and my grin must have stretched from ear to ear. "Yes, yes, yes," I exclaimed, as the jump master approached to offer congratulations and ensure I hadn't sustained any injuries. "Great jump, Josh," he cheered as I gathered my gear and exited the landing area. As I made my way toward the garage where others were emerging to greet me, I noticed beads of sweat forming on my skin, and every sound seemed amplified, sharper. Perhaps that's typical in a brush with death, I mused. All right, perhaps I was a tad melodramatic, maybe more like a tad and a half, but compared to witnessing the birth of my children, this was the most incredible moment of my life, surpassing marriage, even overshadowing my first bed experience. Describing what I had just undergone might prove impossible. At 51 years old and after several years of divorce, I had been drifting through life until a recent trip to Spain injected new energy into my existence. Specifically, the exhilarating encounter with Jorge Santiago revitalized my spirits. The first day back in the States, I practically leaped out of bed. I slipped on my New Balance sneakers and hit the pavement. Although I had been gradually getting back into jogging over the past year, regaining my fitness had been a struggle. However, on that morning, I effortlessly ran 7.2 miles at a pace of 7:30 per mile, a significant improvement from my usual 8-minute mile. Arriving at work, I practically bounced through the door brimming with energy. I was practically unbearable, so invigorated was I feeling. My secretary, Teresa, noticed right away. 5 minutes into my return, she appeared at my office door with her coffee mug and notepad, insisting I had a lot to catch up on after my week-long absence. Our charade ended swiftly when she sat down, gazed directly at me, and remarked, "Okay, spill. You spent the week in Spain getting lucky, didn't you?" "Even better, Teresa," I replied. "I found my groove. Who knew it was vacationing in southern Spain?" "That's fantastic, Josh. I'm genuinely happy for you. You deserve it." I decided to take a couple of courses at the nearby community college just for kicks. With over 1 billion people in China, I figured I ought to delve a bit deeper into their culture. The second class was even more lighthearted, focusing on classic rock. Most of my classmates were around my age, though there were a few youngsters who probably grew up listening to their parents' tunes and got hooked. About a month later, I found myself contemplating skydiving. It's strange how the idea popped into my head, considering I'm terrified of heights. But I felt this urge to confront my fear, and hurling myself out of a plane from 2,000 feet up seemed utterly absurd. Maybe that's the downside of living solo. There's no one around to tell you when a crazy idea is just that, crazy. I mean, why on earth would anyone willingly jump out of a perfectly functional airplane? Yet I went ahead and signed up for the necessary training. The training was fine, but everything took a turn when we suited up, formed groups of 3, and my group headed toward the converted 4-seater plane we were supposed to jump from. In short, I'm grateful I didn't have a weak heart, or I might have been a lifeless body plummeting to earth. Nonetheless, it was an incredible experience that I'm pleased I had, even if just once. After our jumps, a few of us beginners stuck around, sharing drinks and teasing each other about our novice techniques, or lack thereof. I was sipping my second Coke and munching on some vending machine M&Ms when a lively young woman burst into the garage, clearly still buzzing with adrenaline like the rest of us, albeit a few inches shorter and with a higher pitch. She struggled a bit to remove her helmet, revealing a cascade of curly blonde hair, followed by striking lavender blue eyes and a smile straight out of a toothpaste commercial. Once again, my heart skipped a beat. I nearly choked on my candy when she shed her jumpsuit. Despite the warm weather, she was clad in a snug t-shirt and exceedingly tight jeans, tight with a capital T, if you catch my drift. She looked to be around 30, though I later discovered she was actually 44. Her name, I later learned, was Evie Abraham. Perhaps due to her petite stature, She appeared even more lively than the rest of us as we gathered around the table and shared our stories. I found myself unable to look away from her. Eventually, I became conscious of my staring and hoped I wasn't also drooling. Attempting subtlety, I discreetly checked her left hand for a ring, finding none. After spending some time together, Evie rose from the table and headed towards the parking lot. Without hesitation, I got up and followed her. Leaving the airfield that day, I carried with me a cherished memory and a plan for a date the following Saturday night. For our first date, I took her to a Chinese restaurant where she enthusiastically recounted her first jump for the first 10 minutes. I could relate to her excitement, establishing a shared experience between us. Later, our conversation shifted to our personal lives. I shared about my ex-wife and 2 children, while she opened up about her late husband and raising her 2 children alone after he was killed in a wreck by a drunk driver when she was just 34. After she shared her story, she fell silent. I observed tears gathering in her eyes, yet she exerted great effort to hold them back. I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't weep for my own sake anymore after the first year since he passed, she recounted. I realized I was mourning for myself, feeling sorry for both me and the kids, but that's not what Dan would have wanted. He was the type to say, "That's enough tears. It's time to move forward and embrace life." So that's what I did. Dan will always be remembered, but we'll honor him every day by progressing and leading fulfilling lives. Her words moved me deeply. I didn't confess it to her, but I had shed many tears over the years for my own loss of my wife. He sounds like a wise man, offering guidance even to those he never met, I remarked softly. She tilted her head to the right and flashed me a wide smile. I would later recognize that as one of her gestures indicating satisfaction. Having to fulfill both parental roles for her children, she adopted a somewhat tomboyish demeanor in her 30s. She mastered throwing a baseball and football accurately and boasted about her skills on hockey skates with a stick in hand. Despite not being into sports as a child, she became a supportive parent to her 2 athletic children, which involved acquiring knowledge about various sports and tending to their cuts and scrapes. "I'm pretty skilled at butterfly stitches and applying ice packs," she proudly declared. Armed with this knowledge, I took her to a Cincinnati Reds baseball game for our second date. She grabbed my program, turned to the scorecard, and began scoring the game. Most guys I know struggle with scoring, yet here she was, effortlessly doing it like a pro. I was thoroughly impressed. My son played baseball and my daughter played softball. I ended up being the official stats guy for both teams, she explained, using air quotes for emphasis. She stood at a petite 5 feet, radiating with boundless enthusiasm. Her preferred attire consisted of snug tees, jeans, and sneakers, seamlessly integrating into my world as effortlessly as she fit under my arm when we embraced. I received a modest peck on the cheek at the conclusion of our initial date. Subsequently, during our second outing, I experienced tender kisses on the lips multiple times. The level of intimacy progressed from there, but I hesitated to escalate things further until our 6th date, when, as we were concluding the evening, she took the initiative. "Am I not appealing to you, Josh?" she inquired as we engaged in a passionate embrace on her living room sofa. "I mean, you've yet to make a move on me, and I desire more than just a mere touch from you," she expressed, tilting her head to the side with a smile. I felt my cheeks flush. Suddenly, I was transported back to my high school days. "It's been quite a while since I—" "No, not for that," I remarked, looking up to find Evie smiling mischievously. "I feel like we could share something special, but I'm afraid I might ruin everything," I confessed, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. "Oh dear, that's not going to happen. At least from my side. You know, can you impress me if I see how fast you change clothes?" she offered, her eyes sparkling. 6 months later, we got engaged. And 6 months later, a small wedding took place, attended only by her 2 children, my son and Sergio. AJ, although she was invited, decided not to attend, since I did not invite her new husband, Jorge, who quickly divorced after learning about his affair with her daughter. No wonder we didn't choose Spain as our honeymoon destination.